I just have to start out with a nod to Indiana Jones. There you are. Distinguished Indiana Jones. Those of you who were here last night, we saw some movies, let's call them movies about ethical and moral issues of global warming and climate change. The fact that humans are responsible for climate change and global warming, to the extent that geologists can now see this actually in the geological record in the Earth. The signatures are there for an alien intelligence to see a major change in Earth circulation, in Earth quality of the Earth's environment. This is why geologists have recommended that our era on this planet be recognized geologically as the Anthropocene. This is a geological unit referring to the dominance of man or humans on the scene. The suffix "scene" is used in geology, such as Pliocene, Pleistocene, Miocene. What they've done is add the suffix "scene" to anthro, applying to humans. We can have a lot of guilt over this, but I think what a lot of people don't quite understand is that humans are of the Earth. They were created by Earth processes just as many other life forms. We are here today because of climate change, geologically, because of continental drift, plate tectonics, which shifted the continents, caused the creation of the Himalayas, the Tibetan Plateau, changed ocean circulation in the Pacific, and caused the progressive aridification of Africa over the last several million years. It's because of that drying out of Africa that an ape that lived in the trees descended to the ground, started walking on both legs, and eventually started making tools. 2.5, 3 million years ago, this is our origin. Human history then is part of Earth history. They're bound together in one story. So to realize that history, we have to grapple for the next hour, or this morning, we have to scrabble around in the dirt to reveal what that history is. It's in the Earth. It's hard to reveal. It takes special techniques. It takes archaeology. It takes paleontology. It takes basically the study of the Earth. I'm going to lead you into some of the nitty-gritty. You can get a feeling of what geology and archaeology is when it applies to human origins. I have a script because I like to know what I'm going to say before I say it, and I'm always conscious of time, and the script has been timed at about 15 minutes. If I go a little slower, it might be 20 or 30 minutes, and I think that will allow time for questions. Now I have to kind of get centered here. Is everything clear to everybody? Everyone can hear me. The black bear can hear me. Fossil evidence shows that anatomically modern humans evolved in Africa. The earliest fossils right now are in the 150 to 200,000 year range in Africa. Humans then migrated into the Levant and Southeast Asia, into Australia about 50,000 years ago. I think it might be dated now about 60. Into Europe about 40,000 years ago, You might recognize this as the beginning of cave art in the Upper Paleolithic in Europe. Of course, encountering Neanderthals, a different branch of our family. Humans moved into northern Asia about 35,000 years ago when they developed the ability to live in a subglacial climate, wearing tailored clothing and using a variety of bone and stone tools. This leads us to one of the biggest questions in archaeology today. When did humans colonize the Americas? This is where our story can start, on Manitoulin Island, Ontario, at the archaeological site of Shigwinda. I've always heard this pronounced Shigwinda, sometimes Shigwianda, on the east end of the island. The geology at the site is very unusual. You notice the red spot in the middle of the slide. This is quartzite. It's basically metamorphosed and fused grains of sand, surrounded by, in the yellow and the gray, limestone. Quartzite is a marvelous stone to make tools. I've had 40 years of experience flint knapping, and I teach flint knapping to high school students. Quartzite is one of the most difficult things to make a tool from, and the people who did this were very, very skilled. This is a slope of debris on the Shigwinda archaeological site. It's all garbage from tool making. You could not walk on this slope without stepping on stone tools. Just the garbage, the debris left over. The site is absolutely amazing in this regard. It is covered with the debris of tool making chips. As an archaeologist who worked at a museum where all artifacts had to be handled with cotton gloves, it was hugely difficult walking on this site and hearing the crunch of artifacts below your boots. If you ever do have a chance to visit this site, be very careful. The site was discovered in 1951 by Thomas Lee, who's on the left. He was an archaeologist at the National Museum in Ottawa, and he excavated at the site between 1952 and 53. This is a photograph of Lee's crew. Lee is in the black and white newspaper article in about the middle with the Anzac hat, and they laid out a number of artifacts for the photographer. I believe that's probably his tent camp in the 50s. This is a map of the site drawn by Thomas Lee and published in the leading scholarly journal. I want to point out, and if I can do that with my finger here, there should be a little arrow showing. There's the arrow. Can you see the little arrow? These are the debris slopes, the garbage dumps of tool making, which I'm showing you around the site. Lee worked in this area in the southern part of the site. I want to show you one more object on this photo, and that is a ridge called Mystic Ridge. For those of you who are still awake toward the end of my talk, you'll remember the word Mystic Ridge, and suddenly the penny will drop. Lee's work became controversial because he found artifacts in till-like deposits. The controversy stems from the deposits in which the artifacts were found. Glacial tills are deposited by flowing ice. Lee suggested that the artifacts were left by humans who occupied Manitoulin Island just before glaciation, and that the artifacts were carried, artifacts such as these, deposited at the site just before ice advance. The artifacts were picked up and mixed with glacial till and deposited at the site. This is the maximum extent of the last and best known glaciation. I think you see Chagwinda, the little red dot on Manitoulin Island. The question at the time of the excavation, when did glaciation occur? A prominent geologist at the time suggested 30,000 years. This date was based on indirect evidence and little more than an educated guess. The geologist also quipped, "Is that fantastic and alarming?" I do not think so. It was. The archaeological community did not accept the estimates. In the mid-1950s, when Thomas Lee was doing this work, the best documented evidence for early Aboriginal occupation in the Americas came from eastern New Mexico, from a bison kill site near a town called Folsom, and first excavated in 1927, and beginning in the mid-30s from a mammoth and bison kill site near the town of Clovis, which I show on this map. The two spear points, they're heavy enough to have been used on spears, not arrows. Here's my arrow. This smaller point is found in this area, and the larger one, whoops, the larger one, I'm looking for my arrow again, I can't see my arrow, there it is, in this area. These are two mammoth skeletons. I think you can see the tusks of one and the skull, some of the leg bones and scapula. I had the great good fortune while an undergraduate student of excavating a summer at the Clovis site, officially known as Blackwater Draw Locality Number 1. The site was discovered in a gravel quarry, as you can see, originally a riverbed and tributaries, and the work was definitely a salvage excavation conducted over a period of decades. We excavated the remains of 4 mammoth and fragments of an extinct bison. Associated tools were rare, but I was the envy of the crew after excavating the smallest spear point ever found at the site, and which later appeared on the cover of the prestigious journal Science, published by the American Association for the Advancement of Science. But returning to our story, the hunter-gatherers who occupied these sites came to be called early Paleo-Indians and were believed to be descendants of Northeast Asian hunter-gatherers who crossed the Bering Land Bridge into the Americas from Siberia at the end of the last ice age. This is absolutely true. Good genetic evidence for this. These archaeological discoveries were made before radiocarbon dating, but the paleontological evidence indicated that early Paleo-Indians dated to the period before mammoth and fossil forms of bison became extinct, roughly 10 or 11,000 years ago. Remember Lee's date of roughly 30,000 years for Manitoulin? Now you know why the dates, this discovery at Chagwinda was so alarming. And there the matter rested for over 3 decades. In 1991, I was invited by a colleague to take part in the re-excavation of Chagwinda. This was part of a larger project commissioned by a municipality and 2 First Nations to make an inventory of archaeological and other heritage sites, as well as places of traditional Aboriginal use. I wanted to point out key people here. Of course, this is yours truly, recognized by my hat that I'm not wearing. Here's a Pleistocene geologist as part of the team. This is a bedrock geologist, part of the team. Another archaeologist. He was the head of the entire project. You were going to take a tour on the site and it didn't work out. If you had toured the site, you would have seen it with Patrick Julig at Laurentian, who is also an archaeologist, part of our team. And we invited Robert Lee, Thomas Lee's son, to become involved in the project and discuss with us his father's work. record one of the swamps at the top of the site for its vegetation record, and we re-excavated some of Tom Lee's trenches. In fact, we dug them out. We didn't want to do any more disturbance to the site. We actually dug his trenches out and looked at the walls of the excavations he made. We wanted to see exactly what Thomas Lee saw in trying to determine a possible age for the site. So the guy in the hole wearing the orange hat is the Pleistocene geologist. He's sitting in a pile of boulders I'll return to in a minute. This is one of the key pieces of evidence we needed to interpret the deposits. It's actually very simple. It's a diagram showing the percentage of silt, sand, and larger particles in glacial tills. And the glacial tills are these lines at the top. Where's my arrow? Where's my arrow? Oops. There. I got an arrow here? No arrow. Don't want to do that. You see the bars at the top. Those bars characterize glacial till geologically. The bars at the bottom are different. Those bars record the till-like sediments that Lee thought had been deposited by ice. In fact, those deposits are very different. Here's a stratigraphic profile. I'm not going to show you very much, except that from about the top handle of the shovel to the big boulder you see on the wall, this is the area we are concerned about. This is the area that Lee thought of might have been set down by glacial ice. Geological evidence, in fact, shows that these units were not deposited by ice, but by the churning action of water on or near a beach. This interpretation is supported by other evidence, by a thin layer of till that's actually on the base of the site, on bedrock. Above that, some stratified sands and silts. By the boulder layer that you see the geologists working on, condition of quartz grains in the till-like unit. I'm just trying to give you a feeling for the kinds of things geologists get excited about. And one of the most exotic things that help us interpret the age of the way the sediments were deposited is these marine microfossils dating from about 450 million years ago that were derived from a beach deposited by a storm beach deposited by an Ordovician age C about 450 million years ago. And those fossils, those microfossils, actually helped us to date the deposits created by human beings. Always found this irony in a respect. And yes, the image behind it is part of a first-class Canadian stamp. The conodont animal, the fossil conodonts, have actually made it onto the postal service. Radiocarbon dates in the swamp above the site also corroborate our interpretations, and the till, as I say, on the bedrock below the unit that was of question is in fact glacial till. The glaciation, this last glaciation of Manitoulin Island, is called the Wisconsinan, began building in the Hudson Bay region. I think you see the two little blue spots on both sides of Hudson Bay. The ice front passed over Toronto about 60,000 years ago and reached its maximum extent about 18,000 years ago. Actually, we know some of this from the Don Valley in Toronto. Our knowledge of the timing of deglaciation and post-glacial lake level history in the Great Lakes indicates that there was a narrow window for the early human occupation at Chagwinda between approximately 10,200 and 9,500 years ago. This is now where I need the arrow. When I tap this little pad, it's making the thing work. I'm still not getting my little arrow. Now, where is it? Top right, right. You see it yet? There it is. All right. This looks complicated, but it's not. Notice the time is moving across the bar from right to left, from old to young. On the very left is 6,000 years ago. These are radiocarbon years. What I want to show you, and I've lost the arrow again. Where is the arrow?
Peter, there's a laser pointer there.
There's a pointer thing. Oh man, now how do I do both? These guys on this side of the room. All right. This is the early part, and it goes younger. What I want to show is Manitoulin Island was covered by ice in this area of the world, time-wise, and as the ice started to retreat, lakes were formed up against the ice. Lake level started declining. So the red, that site could not have been occupied. The green is the window of occupation, and then there's a red spike. What I want to show you, this is lake level fluctuation in the 11,000 years up to now. This thing. This is the rising land surface. After the weight of the ice left the land started rising from a low point during the Ice Age until today. Of course, it's still rising slightly today. In fact, the eastern end of Lake Ontario is rising. And people, this is the early part of the time, and dates run this way. So this is old, this is younger. Here's our glaciation of Manitoulin Island, falling water levels. This is our window of occupation. This is another spike. So this records lake level fluctuations during the Holocene. And this is the rising land surface throughout the Holocene. This is our window of occupation for Chagrinda. That spike, that little narrow spike, represents a catastrophic release of meltwater from a massive proglacial lake in Manitoba and parts of Minnesota. And it is probably that flooding event that produced the till-like units that contain the artifacts that Lee thought had been deposited by ice. The short story is people occupied the site shortly after deglaciation, visited for a few tens of years or a couple of centuries, and then had to leave because of a catastrophic flood from the west. So during this window of occupation, Chagrinda was occupied by what are called late Paleo-Indians derived from the northern plains. The photograph on the right is a drawing created by Thomas Lee. In my map, I show people moving into the northern Great Lakes region from the north, around the northern end of the lakes, and from the south. We know our late Paleo-Indian peoples who are in southern Ontario, as well as on Manitoulin Island and farther west. These artifacts in the lower, like in the till units, were probably disturbed downward and were made probably for use as knives or blanks for spear points. These are our views. They were published in a series of technical papers published in 2002 in this volume of the Archaeological Survey of Canada, part of the Canadian Museum of Civilization, now the Canadian Museum of History. It was a great experience working on the site. It will interest you to know that the site has been protected since 1954 as a National Historic Site of Canada, something that Thomas Lee helped to make happen. The site remains for the future to correct whatever mistakes we made. Other Paleo-Indians colonized southern Ontario earlier than the northern part of the province. This slide shows progressive ice retreat in southern Ontario, marked symbolically by white arcs with approximate dates, and the expansion of proglacial Lake Algonquin. That lake actually fronted on retreating ice. Notice that Manitoulin Island is ice covered. All of the lighter blue area was either at various times under ice or under glacial Lake Algonquin waters. All of the Bruce was buried, all of the Bruce was flooded, all of the lowlands around Simcoe, Lake Simcoe, was all part of this massive glacial lake. The people who colonized southern Ontario are called early Paleo-Indians, often simply Clovis, from the site in eastern New Mexico where they were first recognized archaeologically. Early Paleo-Indians in the West certainly were big game hunters of mammoth and mastodon, extinct forms of bison, possibly even horse and camel. Might also say they are certainly implicated in Pleistocene extinctions. But these people were probably opportunistic hunters who hunted and trapped a wide range of animals and used many plant products. Early Paleo-Indians may not have been the first people to colonize the Americas. This is an ongoing debate. But they're certainly the most archaeologically visible. And they were also one of the most successful colonizing people in prehistory. Very little was known about early Paleo-Indians in southern Ontario when I joined the ROM. We only had, the museum only had a handful of spear points that had been collected from farmers' fields, no context, no archaeological sites. But with my own work and that of a few colleagues, that picture is now changed. I'm going to show you some of my success stories. Burned animal bone, you see here in the bottom. That's 293 grams of bone. It's the largest collection of animal bone from any Paleo-Indian archaeological site in the mid-continent region, period. It's from a former fire pit on the shore of a site, on a site on the shore of glacial Lake Algonquin, southeast of modern-day Lake Simcoe. It indicates that early Paleo-Indians hunted caribou and trapped Arctic fox, which lives near the tree, which lives on these in the Arctic, and something we identified as a hare, some kind of a rabbit. We couldn't get more specific. The Arctic fox is interesting because the Arctic fox lives on sea ice. This thing was found, as I say, on a site south of Lake Simcoe with caribou, so that tells you quite a bit about the environment. The ice front at that time was probably just a couple of 100 kilometers away. This is a subglacial environment. Damaged tools from a site on the shores of a lagoon of Lake Algonquin. The lagoon I show on the upper left indicate that early Paleo-Indians fished and lived in a spruce parkland environment. A site near the top of the Niagara Escarpment, south of Thornbury, Collingwood, tells us where early Paleo-Indians obtained their stone for making tools, and that they moved seasonally between southern Georgian Bay region and southwestern Ontario and the Niagara Peninsula. The stone only has that source in the north to be used down near London and sites near London and sites on the Niagara Peninsula that had to have been carried in bags or pockets from the Georgian Bay area. A site at the top of the Niagara Escarpment south of Hamilton, the site's in the red dot. This is the Niagara Escarpment, Hamilton Harbor. The site, red dot, Niagara Escarpment, Hamilton Harbor, suggests that early Paleo-Indians may have overwintered in the lowlands around the shore of early Lake Ontario. Shown in the map, the upper map shows you a contour of the bed of the lake. The lake had fallen. All of the area in red, yellow, and green was dry land during early Lake Ontario times. It was as much as 100 meters lower than the modern lake, and the lake edge was 25 kilometers east of the present shoreline. It is that lowland area that I think early Paleo-Indians may have overwintered. If you'd like to read more about what I've been discussing, you might be interested in my book, Journey to the Ice Age, published by the University of British Columbia Press in association with the ROM. This book is written for the general public. It is an autobiographical account of my work, told in street language. It's essentially the backstory of what I've been talking about. This book might interest you as well. After a lifetime of writing technical papers for the scholarly world, this is my attempt to write fiction. And to use fiction as another way of learning. The story is about an archaeologist, you might expect, who on the verge of making a potentially radical discovery faces opposition from native peoples who are struggling with maintaining their cultural identities, indeed their very survival. In broader terms, the story is about social issues in archaeology, questions about what it means to be human, and a potentially fatal flaw embedded in our origins, a flaw that, quite apart from climate change, could lead to our extinction. This is where I think I have time. All right. In the real world, aside from fiction, there is much left to learn about the human story. And I would maybe start this section by telling you these are some of my regrets. Let me give you 4 examples, and I'll call them regrets. An early Paleo-Indian site south of Monterey Lake, Simcoe, at the time part of Glacial Lake Algonquin. We excavated a small cache of informal tools. A microscopic analysis of the tools indicated they were used by 2 people of different strengths for splitting spruce roots, possibly for use in basketry or binding material. Ethnohistorically, this activity is also often done by females, and the fact that the tools were used by 2 people of different strengths suggests a mother and daughter. After use, the tools were deposited together, probably in 2 leather bags. The owners of the tools did not return to the site to retrieve them. What's the story behind this abandonment? Was this a personal crisis for 2 unknown individuals, or was this a marginal region for early Paleo-Indians? Not likely it was a marginal area as we know of other sites, but those sites have not been explored, and no current research is being conducted in the region. This is an overlay on an air photo. A site south of Collingwood is one of the largest early Paleo-Indian sites known in North America. Consisted of 19 areas that contained debris of tool making and broken tools, maybe roughly the size of this room, 19 areas scattered over many, many hectares, right on the edge, Glacial Lake Algonquin. There is a high level of the lake here, a lower level of the lake, and this line, a higher level. So you see the two levels of a lake bisect this archaeological site. Several of the occupied areas seem to have been used for different functions. I highlight these by these little circles that have different markings. So several of those areas were used for different functions. Some of them were used for rough work with toolstone to create blanks for tools, and some areas adjacent to them were used for domestic activities. They seem to be complementary activities, and they may represent small family groups. Question is this: do all of these paired occupations represent a series of repeated occupations over time during falling water levels, or do they represent a macro band? Now we're talking about the sociology of people, the behavior of people, something that archaeology is very difficult to answer. The answer is we don't know. The answer is we could know, but the research has stopped because I'm retired. I need younger students coming along to do lots and lots of things. Another example of a regret. The site south of Thornbury on the Niagara Escarpment was clearly used to obtain toolstone. You see this in the ground with the trowel. Fabulous stuff from bedrock outcrops. The toolstone that occurred in this region was used by early Paleoians almost exclusively throughout southwest and south central Ontario. Why? As a flint knapper, I can tell you, there's nothing special about it. That suggests they wanted to use it or had to use it, and it may not have been for the toolstone alone. So what other things might they have wanted to be in that region for? Something they lived on? Were they hunting caribou on the uplands? Were they looking for fish migrating upstream? I don't know. Could something else have been attracting them there? Trees grown on open areas grow very slowly with very narrow growth rings. Very, very tough wood. Could they have been after trees for handles, for spears? We found some woodworking adzes. Nobody has ever found woodworking adzes at an early Paleogean site in the Northeast before. Looks to me like they were made to be discarded. They were made there for use right there, too heavy to carry around. Did they do that? I can't tell you, I don't know. Finally, south of Hamilton, the Mount Albion site at the upper end of the Red Hill Creek Valley suggests the site was occupied to ambush animals. It's a classic animal trap. Anything moving from the lake up the Red Hill Valley to the top, it's a classic animal ambush area. First thing it suggested to me was that the valley was either an animal entrapment or it was a way for Paleo-Indians to sit for a while on top of the escarpment, use local stone, replenish their toolkits before descending into the basin of Lake Ontario for the winter. We didn't find any evidence in the field to actually say that. It just has to be left as a hypothesis that somebody in the future can follow up and find a way to answer. Tell you that this is one of the most important things in science, in archaeology, is the questions you ask. And they have to be questions that can be answered in the field. There are a lot of questions you can ask that could never be answered. The trick is answer a question that you can find the answer to in the ground. These 4 examples illustrate how very little we know about the people, how they lived socially in the world they experienced. Indeed, the same might be said for our knowledge of humanity itself. We know something about the origins of anatomically modern humans in Africa and about the dispersal of modern humans around the world. But we still don't know when or where anatomically modern humans became behaviorally modern. For those of you in the audience who might be thinking about studying archaeology or have grandchildren who might want to study archaeology or human paleontology or anything related to the human story, there is much to do. I'll end with a British expression: stay calm, carry on. Thank you.